Over the last year or so, you've likely heard us wax lyrical about the current Ford Fiesta ST. And for good reason. It's excellent. More than that, it follows in a long line of very solid hot hatchbacks from Ford, like the old 5-cylinder Focus RS or the previous generation Fiesta ST. And behind those, you've got decades of fast Ford excellence with cars like the Ford GT40 and the RS 200. Put simply, fast Fords have a reputation, a very good reputation. So this, the new Focus ST, has to be good. First of all, two things. With the Fiesta ST, you're at the pointy end of the Fiesta tree. You can't go any higher than a Fiesta ST. With this, the Focus, well, Ford would have left room on the table in every area of the car for the RS. Otherwise, well, they'd run out of things to do. So just remember that this is a Focus ST, not the RS. Secondly, as you might have noticed, this is the Focus ST Estate. Now, why are we driving the Estate rather than the hatch? Well, because estate cars are cool. That's it really. And underneath, it is exactly the same as the hatchback. It makes no difference. So you can go out for a blast at the weekend and bring your dog along. Power comes from a 2.3 litre turbocharged 4-cylinder engine. It's essentially a slightly detuned version of the engine you used to get in the old Focus RS. You've got 280 PS, so 276 brake horsepower, and 420 newton meters of torque, so that's 310 pounds-feet. What I have noticed is how good the diff is actually, and it isn't a traditional limited slip differential, but it's an ELSD, that's what Ford calls it. It's an electronic system that can send up to 100% of the power to just one wheel. Ford says it's faster than a limited slip differential as well. It really works. I don't think you get quite the same clawing of the road feeling that you get with a proper limited slip diff, but it's not to the car's detriment. That is until you turn the traction control off. I think then it doesn't work so well. You really need to leave the systems on to get the most out of it. 0 to 62 miles an hour takes 5.7 seconds, while the top speed is 155 miles an hour, meaning you'll be able to keep up with most of the hot hatch competition, but you'll lose out slightly when it comes to the top end. It's still impressive though, especially when you consider the fact that this is just the ST. The RS will be faster still. The gearbox is a 6-speed manual. There are no clever double clutch autos or anything like that. Ford have kept the recipe simple, which is a good thing. However, as nice as it is to use, and it is very nice to use, it's a Ford gearbox, and Ford always seem to do well with their gearboxes. It's not quite as nice, I don't think, as a Fiesta ST. The clutch feels like it's got a little bit of a longer travel. The gear shift itself also has got a longer throw. So still very good, it's very nice to use, but just not quite as nice as the Fiesta. Whilst on the subject of the gearbox, it's worth mentioning the optional Ford Performance Pack, which will cost you £250. As standard, you get a wet mode, a normal mode, and a sport mode. But with the Ford Performance Pack, you also get track mode, an auto blip feature, and launch control. You also get a bit more noise in sport and track modes. You get some pop from the exhaust, and you get a bit more weight to the steering, the throttle response is a bit sharper, and the dampers get stiffer as well. That brings me to the suspension, and actually you get the same springs in the Focus ST as you do in the standard Focus, but the ride height gets lowered by 10mm, and also you get stiffer dampers at the front and the back. 20% at the front, 13% at the back. Now that's all great, but in track mode, the dampers are even stiffer. That's fine in the drive, but as soon as it's wet or greasy or damp or whatever, then you don't always want the stiffer suspension. You don't always want that stiffness from the dampers, because you'll find that the tyres are starting to bounce and you're not getting the same traction that you would if it was a bit softer. But you can't make it softer without making the steering a little bit lighter, making the throttle response slightly worse. It's a shame almost that you can't have an individual mode or something where you could make the dampers a little bit softer but still have the sharp throttle and the sharp steering. The steering, meanwhile, is super quick. Quick to the point you don't really need to move your hands around the wheel once you're up and running. It's actually 15% faster, this steering, than that of the standard Focus. That, combined with the suspension, means you've got a really pointy front end. Is it as pointy as the Fiesta ST? No. But then again, this has got a wider track, it's a bigger car, so I wouldn't really expect that. For what it is, it's as pointy and as agile as you'd hope it to be. And the brakes, they're sharp. They're really sharp, actually. In fact, they're really very sharp. You've got 330mm discs up front and 307mm discs at the back. There's no dead space at all at the top of the brake pedal, so you've really got to be precise with your braking. If you're going out for a blast, it's fine because you're either on and off the brake more or less, but everyday driving, that's when you've got to think about it, because you've got to be smooth. Otherwise, you and your passengers, they'll be doing this every now and then. Ford could have overcomplicated the ST. They could have tried to put a clever diff in it, they could have made it all-wheel drive, whatever. And even though this is the most complicated ST ever, it still feels quite simple, quite trustworthy. And I like that. You get in it and you immediately feel at home, like you can go out, go for a drive and feel completely safe. It feels very trustworthy. Surely that's exactly how a hot hatchback should feel.